In New York, one may find for the asking an Italian, a German, a French, African, Spanish, Bohemian, Russian, Scandinavian, Jewish, and Chinese colony. The one thing you should vainly ask for is distinctively American community. Jacob Riis.
There started to awake in me a fevered passion to become part of America. I read newspapers and magazines and books like a fanatic. I read out loud billboards, posters, signs of all kinds, and every word, every name opened new vistas to me. I was becoming saturated with Americanism.
Between 1880 and 1914, 23 million foreigners poured into the United States, the largest infusion of immigrants in American history. At the end of the Civil War, 1 out of every 2 Americans still worked on a farm. By 1920, only 1 of 4 did. Immigrants fueled the nation's astounding industrial boom. From coal mines to car factories, they provided the labor that would help make the United States the greatest economic power on earth. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. So read the inscription on the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor that welcomed millions of newcomers to America. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. The United States offered hope and opportunity to millions of people from around the world. Here on America's shores, though, poverty and prejudice continued to plague them. Critics charged that the huddled masses were too wretched, too foreign to become real Americans. But they did become real Americans, and in the process, they transformed the nation forever. In trolleys and tenements, in ballparks and movie theaters, they helped forge a new urban culture. This is the story of how diverse immigrants became Americans, while America itself was becoming something new.
We've always been a nation of immigrants, but the immigrants have come in waves, and each wave has brought people from different parts of the old world. So we began the process over again of getting along with new kinds of people, with adapting to them and they adapting to those who'd already been here.
So until the late 19th century, most immigrants who came were of the same kind of Anglo-Saxon stock from Western Europe as the earlier settlers in this country. What distinguishes the new immigration, beginning with about 1870, is that now we are seeing people coming from parts of the world where they had not come before.
In Europe, industrial revolutions were replacing household production and farming. So more and more people left their small farms for cities like London, Hamburg, and Amsterdam. And millions continued on to the new United States, where wages were higher, food was more plentiful, and land was easier to buy. Industrialization then seized Southern and Eastern Europe, countries like Italy, Poland, Hungary, and Russia. Here, too, factories displaced small craftsmen, and cash crops displaced small farmers. So they, too, migrated to the United States.
The new immigrants came for many of the familiar reasons: for economic opportunity, for greater freedom, political freedom, and religious freedom, because Europe was at war with itself for much of the 19th century. And these punishing wars were another reason for leaving the old world and coming to what would be a more peaceful America.
In the early 1900s, 80% of America's immigrants came from Southern and Eastern Europe, including 3 million Italians, 2 million Jews, and 1 million Poles. Between 1898 and 1919, over 3 times as many immigrants came from these new countries as from the old ones. England, Ireland, and Germany. Before the Civil War, immigrants had spread across the countryside to farms and villages, as well as towns and cities. As America industrialized, however, most of the new immigrants moved to America's cities. Immigrants and their children made up 87% of Chicago, 84% of Detroit, 80% of New York, and 78% of San Francisco. Roughly 40% of these birds of passage went back to their homeland. For some ethnic groups, the figure was as high as 60%.
Many of these people who came never intended to stay in the United States for very long. They were here and intended to make money and go back and buy a little farm that they wouldn't have been able to buy if they hadn't created capital by coming to the United States.
Children and their parents spent long hours at dangerous and often monotonous occupations.
Not only were they the ones who found themselves working for low wages and long hours in factories, but they also came into a country which did not open their arms and welcome them. They found great prejudice and even bitterness on their arrival.
Employers were often successful in dividing workers along ethnic and racial lines.
Well, the relation between unions and immigrants was very complicated because many large American unions had been started by immigrants. A good example is the American Federation of Labor, whose president, Samuel Gompers, was a Jewish immigrant from England, a cigar worker. And yet, as money and work tightened in the United States, these same unions very often started to try to keep immigrants out of the United States because immigrants represented job competition.
We sympathize with the oppressed of the old world, but we are, as a country, in the position of any other asylum whose dormitories are full up. The American labor movement is strictly American. The American Federationist, 1897.
Other immigrants were victimized by the agents who found them work in America. Italians often had to pay a large part of their wage to their padrone, or patron, who provided room and board as well as a job.
We came to Brooklyn, to a wooden house in Adams Street that was full of Italians from Naples. Bartolo had a room on the 3rd floor, and there were 15 men in the room. Most of them worked at digging the sewer. They paid him about 1/4 of their wages. Then he charged them for board, and he bought the clothes for them too. So they got a little money after all.
With so little money, immigrants clustered together in squalid urban neighborhoods.
There were no bathrooms in the buildings. There was no running water in the buildings, so you had to carry water from the basement of the building up until 2, 3, or 4 floors of steps to get into your own apartment.
With names like Little Italy, Polish Hill, and Chinatown, these ghettos were ridden with poverty, filth, disease, and sometimes even death.
The hall is dark, and you might stumble over the children pitching pennies back there. The sinks and toilets are in the hallway, that all tenants may have access, and all be poisoned alike by their summer stenches. Listen, that short hacking cough, that tiny helpless wail, what do they mean? A child is dying with measles. With half a chance it might have lived, but it had none. Jacob Riis.
In Pittsburgh, 55,000 people, mostly immigrants, contracted typhoid from the poisoned water supply. In Baltimore, they ate oysters from polluted rivers and developed deadly stomach diseases. And in New York, home to the largest number of immigrants, 1/3 of Italian babies did not live to see their first birthday.
All of the time I hear about the grand city of New York. I learned that New York is 2, 3, 4, 10 times bigger than Italian city. I think I'm going to great city, to a grand country, to a better world, and my heart develop a big admiration for America. I arrive in New York. You think I find here my idea? Alessandro De Luca.
I looked out into the alley below and saw pale-faced children scrambling in the gutter. There is America, cried my heart. Anzia Jezierska.